All right, well, one thing says it started, the other thing says it's still in progress.
It says YouTube Live for me.
Yeah, there we go. Now YouTube is up. All right, we are live on YouTube. This is the May 28th, 2021 meeting of the Node.js Loaders team. All right, promote Steven. All right, so our agenda for today. First up is the PR that Jacob's been working on. So why don't we start with that? And Jacob, do you want to tell us? I guess the most important question I have for you is what's blocking us merging this in? So why don't you tell us where you're at and then what we can do to help get this finished?
I believe it's done. The only thing blocking it is Derek's blocking review from like several weeks ago. He had blocked it thinking that it also included phase 2, and he had some like concerns about how phase 2 would be done. And then his blocking review was just never removed.
Okay, well, we'll see if he comes today. I looked at it. I haven't looked at it today. Let me open it up. But I looked at it like earlier in the week, and I thought there were a lot of comments from I don't know their name, Ada95, Antoine.
Yes.
Have all of those been resolved?
Yes, he approved it.
Oh,
He had
okay.
a couple nits around the documentation, which I committed, and then that broke the linter. So then I think it was this morning or last night, I pushed up. The linter didn't like using a colon in the documentation,
The
so I had
linter's
to.
quite picky.
It's obnoxious. So I had to
You
figure
can
out.
run it locally. There's like a make command. I think it's like make lint docs or something like that.
Yes,
And so then you don't have to like wait for the whole process of
the
Jenkins
problem
yelling at
was
you.
I just took his, he did it as a suggestion in the PR, and I accepted the suggestion, thinking that it would be fine because I'm like, okay, this is just words. But then it was like, the error
Probably
message was like,
too long of
your
a
column
line or
is
something.
is wrong or something. No, it wasn't length. It was complaining that like, there was a disagreement in columns or something. So I thought it was too long, and I was like, oh no, it's only 66 characters. So half an hour later, I finally figured out it didn't like the colon.
So, all right, I will, so we'll try to track down Derek. I will try to find time soon to review this, hopefully this weekend.
Cool.
I want to get Guy to say where he stands on it because it's been several weeks since he looked at it, and this is a lot of his code. So I want to make sure he's approving this before we merge it in.
Okay.
So if we can, I'll try to reach out to him. But yeah, other than that, can you summarize what this does in the end? Like, did it go a little any beyond what we were initially talking about as the kind of merging a
Only
couple hooks?
only ever so slightly. The only additional thing that it does that beyond what we originally talked about was optionally allowing format in the resolve as a return from the resolve hook.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna start adding some notes. Okay, so I'm gonna just jot down with this. So completes merging the hooks into resolve and load and still global preload code, I guess.
Yes.
And then format can optionally be returned from resolve.
Yeah,
And that's it essentially.
Yeah, and I included test cases for both when format is included and when it's not included, so it all checks out.
All right. Well, this is fabulous. So let me, yeah, congratulations. Here, does anyone else have any thoughts on that or notes on it? Let me- All right, so let's see. Okay, so so this is where we are then. Wait, which one was yours? This one?
68. Yeah.
And then what was is this like the old one that was like Jan's
Yeah.
from a year ago or something? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So is there anything in here that, I'm assuming once we merge yours in, we'll just close this one as being superseded, right?
Yes. Actually, should I put that as a comment um, or in the body of my pull request, and then it will automatically close this one when mine gets merged?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, whether or not it does it automatically, we can follow up and do it. But
Okay.
yeah, it would be good to link them somehow. Maybe put it
Cool.
in the top comment on yours so that it's
Yeah.
like real, it's pretty prominent. Okay, so
I think that's
then, okay, so this part, did you potentially already do this too?
Yeah. So that pull request that I opened, and then you were like, the pull request I opened, I think it was like a few days ago, and you commented saying it's not done yet because the 68 pull request needs to go first, right? And I said yes. So that pull request is the one that updates this list that says what the remaining work is.
Oh, I don't mean like updating this document. I meant like in the PR that we were just talking about, 68,
Mhm.
does it do this work? Like,
Yes.
okay,
So could you pull up the pull request I sent against this document? Because it
this one?
specific, no,
Oh,
in this
the one
repository.
in,
Yeah, that pull request specifically says exactly what you're asking.
um, oh, okay, so you're marking, oh, the first three are all going to be complete then in this first PR.
Yes.
So you did all three of these in the
I
one
don't
PR.
think training was in it.
Pardon?
Chaining is down here. Chaining would still be under upcoming.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so according to this, so here, I'm going to go to the other view because it's a little easier, at least for me to read. This PR does simplifying the hooks,
Mm-hmm.
simplifies not just the public-facing API hooks, but also the internal node loader hooks.
Yeah.
And it does this of the exception on unknown file types is now thrown in load.
Yes.
Okay. Here, I'm gonna add this to the other thing. So here, I'll just
I'm
copy
pretty sure on that
this.
last one. If I updated it in the pull request to say it was, I had checked it at that time.
Yeah, we should, if it doesn't say all this in the like if these things aren't mentioned in the description at the top, we should probably add it so that
Okay.
people okay, I added it to the Google Doc too. All right, so then this PR is huge, or at least covers a lot of
Accomplishes a
ground.
lot. Yeah.
So, okay, so once we land it, so yeah, Bradley, if you have time to review it too, we should get a lot of eyes on this because it gets us 3/5 of the way to finishing this list. And then then we're right up at the cusp then of chaining. All right, so which I think is the next item on the agenda. So is there anything else to talk about this PR first before we dig into that
No.
from anybody?
had so much feedback. I can't imagine this possibly anymore.
Not this PR. This PR.
Oh, this is not that much feedback,
Really?
which is the sad part.
Oh God.
Um,
I mean, this is why I split this into, you know,
Yes.
I was suggesting that this be at least 3 PRs because yeah, it can. And the other thing is like big PRs, just it almost gets exponentially more difficult because then it's like it's hard to get people to review them because it's such an investment to review all that code.
Yes. I
So
think
like
consolidating the methods was ended up being a necessity, and that's why that ended up getting incorporated.
yeah,
Like a
I mean that
logical
doesn't
necessity.
surprise me, but yeah. What, Bradley?
yeah, so I think chaining, we're gonna have to split it up as well.
Okay.
Because we had PRs for chaining in the past. We've had 3 to core. We'll get to that. It's the next agenda item.
Seems like there are quite a lot of like use cases to consider for chaining. And happily, people have started to chain in on what their use cases are, like
So
community-wise.
yeah, I mentioned just this morning, there are these other documents in this repo. So like resources, so that I suggested that whoever started that issue with the other loaders, just open a PR to add them to this. And it's a little easier to follow than like comments on an issue thread. And we have this use cases. This, I copied this from something, I forget what. It was, I think, there was a use cases thread, I think, in as part of the loaders next steps. I think people, yeah, in loaders next steps, that humongous thread that's got like 300 comments
Yes.
now. At one point, people were talking about their use cases. So I just kind of skimmed through the whole thread, picked out the comments that mentioned use cases and consolidated them into this. So the idea was to try to make this stuff easier to find. So you don't have to read, 40 pages of comments to find what you're looking for. But yeah, these are just markdown files in this repo. So if anyone can feel free to open a PR and then we can just approve it at a meeting. Speaking of which, yeah, if people don't mind giving approvals to these, I don't know if they need to or what, but so yeah, these are just the minutes for last time. So unless there are any other notes, I'll merge this in.
Did you fix my name?
Fix your name.
Yeah.
Fix what?
I think you had it. Yeah. So you have my name as Jacob Jingleheimer. That's just my
Oh, that's your
like
username.
Yeah, my actual name is Jacob.
Okay, we'll deal with this later after the meeting. But yeah, sure. Or you could submit a suggestion on here and I'll
I
click
did.
approve.
I don't know where it
Oh,
went.
well. Anyway, yes.
Anyway,
I mean, that can always be PRs afterward too. But
cool.
all right. So moving on. Let me open the other one. Okay, so Jacob, you opened this. Do you want to introduce it?
Sure. So basically, there are 2 kind of leading approaches for how to tackle chaining. The first one, I called it the next one because that seems to be kind of the most important thing about it, whereby next is an alias to the next loader. And then the other one uses a done to say stop. So for the next one, it is potentially a little bit more robust than the done one, but I believe that the next one comes with a lot more gotcha kind of complexity than the done one. I think for the next one, you must call next, and if you don't, things fail in a very weird way. So there's some extra hand holding that we could potentially do, but when I was implementing the current stuff, which basically uses next, I even ran afoul of some of the gotcha complexity stuff And I'm like, okay, well, I wrote this, then if anybody should be okay with it, it would be me. Whereas with the done one, if you need to have very, very little knowledge about how it works to actually use it. So it's basically like you only need to know what you're trying to use. And if you're not trying to use it, it just kind of works. It
So we should avoid the phrase "it just works." Everything works. Everything does a thing.
Yeah.
You should explain what "it just works" means.
It behaves as you expect.
No, don't use "as you expect." Like what does that mean? What do you expect? Like,
Yeah,
okay,
I think it's fair to follow up with clarification, but behaves as you
no,
expect is a useful starting point because it
yes.
says, the
Well,
intuition
it
is tough to
behaves
Well,
as it behaves as
I
some
have a
users
very,
expect.
very opposite view, which is why I bring this up. Like, I
sure.
really don't like the return value. I think it's very,
Well, here
it's an
let's
anti-pattern.
let's
So that's
let-
why I want us to just clarify what we mean when we say it behaves as expected.
yeah let's let
So,
Jacob fully explain it first, and then we can
yeah.
debate it. Okay.
Cool. So yeah, with the next kind of approach, it's the design of it is a bit bespoke. So for very pervasive patterns that use next, this behaves basically the opposite of how those work, which I believe many users will find very counterintuitive and be quite confused because they will expect it to behave like how most other things that this appears to be similar to behave.
Can you
And then,
clarify? I'm just going to keep asking clarifications every time. It's called bespoke or whatever. Like
Are you
what?
referring to like express, or like what's
Yeah.
your
yes,
example of something that behaves that has
so like
next but behaves differently?
a generator, express, I believe those are the two examples that I have.
So it behaves
Um,
exactly like express on purpose.
It
So
doesn't, because in Express, if you don't call next, it doesn't just like silently blow up in very strange ways.
yes, it
Actually,
does.
it
It hangs
does.
the connection.
Yeah, for
Because
It does
middleware
that
at
on
least.
is
purpose.
that
If you
Yeah.
don't call next in middleware, it's like
Even the final connector, it'll hang the connection.
it just sits there as like, and it doesn't crash, but it also doesn't do anything. It never responds. Yeah, and you're wondering like, what the hell just happened? My computer freeze? Yeah.
well, yeah, that is sort of
We're
what
not
happens
saying
here,
it's
but
good. I don't think
yes,
people
yeah,
say it's good. They
There
I
is
just want,
precedent, I guess is
I
the point.
haven't used Express admittedly in a couple of years because it's kind of died. But from what I remember, if you didn't, maybe it was an older version, it worked exactly as you expected when you didn't call next. And you only needed to call next explicitly with an error if you were trying to opt into the error handling.
I think you're thinking of handlers for particular routes. Like if you have like, app.get/foo, you
Yes,
don't need to call next unless you're throwing an error from
yes,
that
exactly.
handler. But if you're creating middleware, like something that parses cookies, the middleware function that gets called, like, the name comes from, it gets called in between Express receives the request, but before it gets sent to that function that does the like /foo, Express will run every middleware function that is registered with Express. And
Okay,
so
yes.
each middleware function has to call next so that it goes to the next middleware function and eventually to the final function, which is the handler for responding to /foo.
so we
Yeah.
actually have a case where we have static after our general handlers. So you call next without an error. In that case, and it'll get the static, not the error.
In the
So
middleware
like
case.
it literally just calls the next thing. There's no special case for the leaf nodes, like route handlers.
Sorry,
Like
I've
if you
lost you.
don't tell it to continue, it just hangs.
in the route
Well, I
handlers,
guess in the
like
the,
get,
the
blah,
route
blah, blah, blah,
handlers
blah.
are the ones where you do like response.send or something like
Yes.
that to like send the HTML back to the
Yeah.
user. And if that's all you want to do, then you don't need to call next. And it's not like anything's hung. It's just like the function executed, finished what it's doing, and like any other function that finished what it's doing, it gets whatever,
Yeah.
garbage collected or something. So if you know that you don't need any, if you've already returned the HTML to the user, you know you don't need Express to do anything else. So there's no need to call next, and the function can just stop.
Yes.
So I
see
guess
how,
Bradley's
like,
right. There's nothing special about the handler. It's just that's traditionally where you don't call next unless it's
Correct. Yeah.
an error.
yes. So I see how like these loaders are more analogous to the middleware, and how if you are aware of that it would make more sense for you to expect it to behave like that. But I think the vast majority of users will be more familiar with the route handler part of Express. And if they haven't touched like a custom middleware thing before, then they will not be familiar with that. And so I think that's probably much more likely to happen.
Where they
So
assume
in
that
that
you can
case
call next
too,
because
you
they're not
don't
used to
you don't
using it except for
use the
errors.
return.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
I mean,
Bradley?
that's a fair point. I think one other thing that we have to keep in mind is like something that was said a long time ago is like there are not going to be that many people writing loaders. Like we saw with that list of like loaders out in the wild. I mean, yeah, there's whatever, a dozen or something,
5.
but like most typical apps aren't going to have a custom loader. Someone's going to write a TypeScript loader, like there's going to be whatever, a few dozen loaders written and on NPM, but that's it. Like the average application developer isn't going to be doing this. So, that's just something to keep in mind. Is like we don't have to bend over too far backwards because this is very much like a power user feature.
Yeah, I just am concerned that like for probably what I think most users will need, it is not that advanced. Like they just want to do some like live transpiling of TypeScript, or they just want to fix a path in some simple way. Maybe like an alias, but now we have import maps and stuff. So like my main concern is like, don't make easy things difficult.
Sure.
But like, if we
I
have
think
to do
we
that
agree.
in order to in order to support the advanced things, then okay, maybe necessary.
Well,
evil.
that's kind of what I'm getting at is that like we don't. I think because remember the user base of people using loaders is going to be high, but the user base of people writing loaders is going to be small. So the writing loaders users probably want the most powerful thing we can supply to them, even if it's slightly more complex. These are all
Yeah.
subjective targets. I'm not saying that next or done or one's better or easier than the other, but just to keep in mind, like that's where I'm coming from as like a point of analysis for this.
Which
Sure.
which things can we do with next that we perhaps like? Are there any features that you lose when going the done route?
Well, can you
Yeah.
explain just how done works? I didn't quite get.
Yeah,
I feel like
let's go
with
we've
the
never gotten there.
explanation first.
Sorry, I had to go to the bottom of the sea before I could move on. So yeah, for done, how that works is if you need to short circuit and say like, stop, we have finished what we're doing. Maybe there's 50 more loaders, ignore them, we're done. That's when you call done. Aside from that, if you are continuing the chain, if your loader is kind of like opting out and saying, I have nothing to do, ignore me, then it returns, I think, nullish. Yes, it would return nullish. So it's saying I have nothing for you. If it returns a valid or invalid value, that gets accepted and passed along to the next loader. The next hook in the chain. And at some point, that value needs to eventually be a valid value, but anything in between start and finish is fine. And then if it explicitly calls if it explicitly returns, say, false, skip this file. So basically, it uses these very specific kinds of returns as flags about what to do. Probably most of the time, you will only be returning some kind of string value or opting out. In the, I think, probably more rare cases, or the rarest of cases, is when you'll short circuit, because otherwise most loaders would behave like in the opt-out fashion of, I don't know what this is, continue. So for whoever's question about what the differences are between next and done, where the functionality next provide or facilitate that done doesn't, the only one that I've seen so far is to dynamically manipulate the sequence of hooks. So someone posted early this morning, potentially needing to do some kind of detection and then call next some number of times or something, and then influence the sequence of the load hook order. With next, you can do that. I wasn't really sure why this user was saying that they needed to do that. But if that is an actual
on this thread,
I think yes. Yeah.
So one
Here.
thing that is being described here, it's not necessarily that the load order is being manipulated. It's that you're delegating multiple times, oftentimes because you're doing some kind of path searching. So like people might use it to look for file extensions. People might do it to look in multiple directories, like Webpack supports, stuff like that. It's the fact that you can communicate repeatedly with the loader you delegate to. So that's one of the features of Next.
You mean like within the same hook, you could call next multiple times?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's only calling the next loader saying, please return me what you would get. You could call it as many times as you want. You can call it preemptively. So you see, hey, you're gonna transpile this TypeScript file. The TypeScript file's importing other things like definition files. So you start loading definition files and stuff like that.
Actually, for that case, we could not even, I don't remember exact details, but we actually could not go that route. We actually had to duplicate the source code of Node's internal resolver, because we couldn't do something as simple as like find this file if it has the JS extension, then find it if it has the TS extension, because intermediate directories and things I think would be skipped over by the first resolution. I forget exactly why. I can put more details in an issue.
Yeah,
but
I know exactly why. So there was at some point in time an effort to give parameters to each loader. And so you would need to pass parameters for custom resolution options like that to the loader you delegate to. That got scrapped somewhere along the way because shipping modules, we basically ripped out everything we couldn't agree upon. So without the ability to send extra data essentially to the loader you're delegating to, you can't tell it, hey, also look for these extra file extensions and stuff like that.
I think I've done something similar to this, and I shoved that information in package.json. And it has like a loaders config option in there. And so my loader is reading that information and then using it inside of the hooks.
Yes, but the default loader doesn't accept those kinds of parameters.
Oh yeah, you're not passing it as like an argument um, in the hook function, and it's not like a command line argument. It's just the
here it
loader
is.
itself imports package JSON.
So here's the example I was looking for. I was thinking it was in the CoffeeScript loader example, but clearly not in the live one, but in the like future state one that's in the design and the loaders.
Mhm.
So once we have a load, once your first PR is merged in and we only have a load hook, basically any loader that just wants to do something with a file loaded off disk. So like resolve tells Node where to find the file on disk, and then it just needs to get loaded, and then we're going to do something with it before returning it, like for example transpiling it or adding instrumentation to it, who knows what, mocking part of it, whatever. The way that this example is written is that, like in this case, next is nodes. Well, say that HTTP isn't here. Say it's just this loader that you're working with, okay?
Mhm.
So then, and we're just loading a .coffee file, okay?
Mhm.
So then this next call is just that's Node's internal load hook, saying which will, given a path on disk, just read it and return the string, nothing else. It's not going to validate that it's a known file format or anything like that, not yet. So we're calling next in order to, like in the current examples for like default load or whatever it's called, default get
Mhm.
format, etc. Default get source. We're calling like the default one or the node one to get the source, or whatever source would have been, like maybe there's some other transpiler in between this one and that one, that like say this is they say you're writing a Babel loader. So there's a Babel loader and a CoffeeScript loader. So the CoffeeScript loader calls Node to get the source, converts it to JavaScript. The Babel loader gets CoffeeScript's output and then converts it to more JavaScript. But anyway, that's the idea here, is like this can call nodes. So in the next approach, that's possible because it's like the loader can decide whether, like, will node blow up if it tries to do the default case. Like if the loader knows that it's got an HTTP URL, then it shouldn't be calling next with that, because that'll, like, node will error on that. Is this kind of thing possible in the done approach, and how would that work?
I think yes, because all that has to happen between start and finish is do whatever needs to be done so that Node understands the final output. So if you want Node's default to do something first, then just sequence your hooks that way.
Yeah, but how would you, like in the example I just did, like, this is the first function that's run, but then it calls Node's default loader inside of it, which makes Node's loader the second function that's run. And then it returns back to the first one, which then returns to the other, ESM loader, the thing that's going to actually execute whatever the final format and source are.
Right. So
but if this, it's like, it seems like Node's loader has to run before your function runs, right? So it's like either Node's load hook always runs first, and it always has to work. Well, but that can't be the case, because it's not always going to work. Like if resolve returned to URL or something like that.
So yeah, this is, I think, what I was talking about earlier about dynamically manipulating the sequence that the hooks run. So next supports that, but done does not. So if you have different orders that the hooks need to be called in, then you probably can't really do that with done.
Can
but
you-
go ahead.
Can you clarify? You're saying reordering, and I don't think we're really talking about reordering. We just want to figure out how inside the done model we can get the result of how a body is loaded.
So when in the done model, it's like a promise chain. So when you have a then, you return, the next then receives whatever that return was.
So
and
it would
continues on.
require the default hook always run,
Yes,
and then the next hook always run.
yes,
So anything that consumes a value must have everything it can get a value from run before it can see if it uses the value.
get a value from run. So what do you mean it has to get a value from run?
So let's go back to the CoffeeScript loader, for example.
Uh-huh.
We're saying that in order for the CoffeeScript loader to work in the done model, the default must always run. So essentially, instead of having parameters URL context next, you just have a single result parameter. And it's the result of whatever the thing that ran before you.
Yeah.
This means that Node's default hook always runs, like you were
Correct.
saying.
Mhm.
This also means that if I don't want to use the result of Node's default hook always runs,
Yes. So
regardless
anything,
of if I'm ever going to use it.
yes, if you put something in front of
No,
whatever.
the default is that you cannot put something in front of the default. Like, you can't feed the default anything.
I mean,
It just gets the parameters.
or it just has to be flipped. Like in the done model, Node's default would always have to be last rather than always be first. And then sometimes it gets short circuit. Like sometimes we call done so that it short circuits before you get to the nodes. But
Right.
if you
I'm
don't
not
call
sure
done,
how
then
that
it
would
does.
work mechanically.
And we need the ability to short circuit, right? So that we can synthesize modules in memory,
Yeah.
right?
And done
Well,
does support
nodes
short circuiting.
well, yeah, we can't always go to nodes default because it's like just not going to know what to do with some things. It's not going to know what to do with an HTTP URL, etc. It's not going to know what to do with JSON source, etc. So we need to be able to short circuit so that we can, not be limited to what Node. Like if we're limiting ourselves to what Node already knows what to do with, then we kind of don't need loaders. You know what I mean? Like the whole point is to extend so what Node doesn't know how to handle.
Right. And done is the short circuit. So if you say like stop propagation, like event stop propagation, stop doing anything, that says like this is handled.
I mean, one thing we could do is like,
Well, even if we
pass
have that,
in.
the problem is we're calling all the hooks before that. Like, regardless of if we want to stop propagation, like we're running hooks that shouldn't be run.
Well, no, Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is not the way it works, right? The hook comes first, and with done, it chooses whether or not to invoke Node's built-in loader, right?
Yes.
So I think we might be getting a little mixed up on the
I don't
ordering
know.
here.
Well, no, we
Has he
need the
clarified
result of
where
Node's
Node's
loader.
loader is in the chain? Is it first? It's got to be
Wherever-
either first or last.
Wherever you choose for it to be.
Well, how can you
No,
define where
it
Node's
needs
loader
to
is
be
going to
first
go?
or last. Like you can't give it stuff unless you're like disallowing various workflows like rewriting URLs.
Why?
Like if I rewrite the URL that's being imported, then you call Node's loader, it needs to get those parameters, not just the result, the rewritten parameters.
It wouldn't receive only a result.
I'm confused on what node. Okay, let's ignore the CoffeeScript loader for a second, because maybe we're
Okay.
too involved.
Well, what I was just
With
gonna say
an
though, Bradley,
HTTPS
is yeah, I was gonna
loader.
say like it would almost be useful to help illustrate your proposal would be like
Mhm.
take these two loaders, take this whole
Mhm.
example of just forget the other one because the other ones are resolved, so that's kind of simpler.
Mhm.
This one is an example of chained load hooks, and there's only two. So the idea is like make it so that you can, where is it? Yeah, example.com, https example.com/module.coffee.
Mhm.
Imagine there's an import statement with that in it, and we want it to actually work. So it both needs to be loaded over the network and transpiled. So then what would the two loaders look like
You'd
to
have
achieve
your
that?
you'd have your HTTPS loader that would return some value. That returned value would then get passed to the next load hook in the chain, which you have control over the sequence. It's static sequence, but you can still control the
Sure.
sequence.
Okay.
So you put HTTPS first. HTTPS says, this is a remote thing. I do need to go fetch it, or this is not. Ignore me.
So
And it steps aside.
that's this
Okay.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does this. It goes and fetches it. It returns. Then the next will say, it happens to be that the next one in the sequence is your CoffeeScript or TypeScript transpiler, Babel, whatever. It
Okay.
receives that file, does its transpilation, and if there's nothing more to do, it says, here is the transpiled thing done.
Okay. And what happens if I load a data URL or a file URL?
If it's a file URL, then HTTPS loader should ignore that. You
Okay.
would probably want to put those sorts of like reading type loaders rather than transforming loaders. You want to put the reading ones up at the start of your list. So HTTPS loader says, I don't
Okay.
recognize this. Next. Next. And then whatever the next hook is,
The file loader.
File loader
whatever.
says, I know what to do
But
with
that
this.
just means we have to re-implement Node's loaders for everything. Because Node supports data and it supports file already.
Okay.
Or
And
are you
how are we piping Node's general result to CoffeeScript?
CoffeeScript would be a load hook after.
They're both in the load hook.
But you can have multiple load hooks.
Correct. How do
So-
I call the default Node hook? Like to
you're
pipe it?
you're saying
How
to re-enter the full loader stack?
CoffeeScript gets the result of a file.
Like he's wanting to
somehow.
know how to do this line right here.
Yes, that's the main contention.
You return the value, and that value gets piped into
How?
the next
I'm
return.
I
Literally
understand
return.
the concept. I understand the high level concept,
Okay.
but like how?
I
Like
think
code,
the only way to do it would be like
do.
we would
be
have
a-
to have more arguments. There would have to be, in addition to done, there would have to be like default load or something like that. Like we currently have like default get source or something. And that way you could call into the node default version of that hook anywhere in the chain and
Right.
get its result. And, you know, then you'd still be able to get this line because you'd be able to call nodes.
Yeah, like if you were to have persistent access to Node's default stuff, then yeah, stick it in as a fourth, probably fifth
I
argument.
don't actually want persistent access to node stuff. I want persistent access to like just get the source, whatever the URL is. It could be like an Electron URL. The CoffeeScript loader doesn't want to know it's loading directly from Node. It just
Right.
wants to work on the result.
It would
I mean,
be
in
blissfully
addition,
ignorant of that because it would have happened before it got here.
well, in addition to like,
That's what we're trying to figure out. How did it happen?
This is what you
I-
need to work out in the example though, is like, what are these arguments in load? Because it's like, we want persistent access to URL and context,
Mhm.
you know, so that we know, like, because we're going to need to do things like this,
Yes.
whether or not there's a result from previous. And then result, like, which may be undefined because this isn't the first, it, you know, may or may not be the first loader. Because it sounds like you're saying that the node default is always last in the chain. So we can't assume that there's always some result before this because this could literally be first because node is last. So it would sound like the arguments are something like, you know, result, URL, context, done, default load,
Yes.
something along those lines.
Something like that. Yes.
So I would say, like, take this example of these
Mhm.
two, well, maybe these two and these three, and rewrite them with done. Like, how would you implement these two examples in done? And I think that would clarify a lot of these questions that people are asking, because then we would see what the API is.
Okay. Cool.
I think also one thing we might need is an ability not just to call next, but to call from the top. And correct me if I'm missing something here, but supposing that you want to know how to load a file pulled from a web server. So you're trusting a loader to pull it from the web server. But then to figure out how to treat that file, you need to pull other files from the web server in the same directory. Essentially, you want to kick off a new pass through the full loader stack to resolve a completely different asset.
So generally how that happens automatically right now, since you call another import.
Hmm.
I mean, if you're gonna include another file, once you're done with your chain, Node gets one of the well-known formats, sees that it has some imports going on and restarts it.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of an example right now, but there could be a case where the files are not one-to-one with modules, right? Where there may be multiple files that constitute a single, like ESM module. I can't think of an example, but that'll be one reason why you'd want to end up going through the stack twice, potentially.
Yeah, like if I wanted to execute a file not on the local file system, but on a web server, and yet I wanted something akin to Node's behavior where to figure out which file it resolves to,
Like
it
if you
needs
want
to
the web
consult.
server's hosted package.json to see if it has type module in it, or if you're looking for like an import map that's hosted on a web server, something like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, or
Or
like a
X
TS config source to dist file mapping.
Yeah, any type of metadata or manifest file. Okay.
I think this touches on, I think it was an issue
So-
opened a couple days ago, where they wanted to be able to configure the loaders sort of dynamically to inject that kind of behavior.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, was that you? Okay.
It's okay. I didn't introduce myself. It's fine. Yeah, but I also I realized that like dynamically configuring the loader stack is perhaps a different concern than just given that we have a loader stack. How do the loaders invoke each other? And
Well, no, I think you were saying you wanted to be able to like add extra loaders and like configure how they behave, right? Because you had like
So
those query parameter stuff, right?
yeah, that mostly the use case was just the node process has already booted. We already have code running, and that code that's running is some sort of command line tool that realizes after the fact, hey, now I need to dynamically add a loader, you know, to serve this command line use case. It is okay that the code that I've already loaded has not been instrumented or transformed or loaded. That's fine. But in order to load this next plugin or file or asset or whatever, I will need this extra loader functionality. How can I add it dynamically?
I think neither done nor next really facilitate that.
this
I
is
mean,
intentionally banned in designs previously due to problems. So if you look at Node source code, we actually maintain 2 module registries, one for loaders, one for app code.
Mhm.
And we did that after bugs showed up of doing what you're asking to do. Like, modules don't actually like being loaded in partially instrumented states.
I
So
think
you could have part of module graphs that you're loading be instrumented, which is bad, is our result.
well, we're not talking about instrumented. We're talking about something that Node cannot load at all until it gets this additional loader. So and I do understand the concerns, but in this case, it's so Node has done its initial static traversal of all ESM modules. They've all been resolved and linked and everything, and it boots up. And now you're running this command line tool, and this command line tool discovers I have a file in the file system that I want to dynamically import. So adding more stuff to the module graph, but it literally can't do that until it gets this additional bit of loader functionality.
I understand. I'm just stating that like this, we've had a similar thing in the past. It was really bad. We did something equally bad to mitigate it, basically. And it solved it. I'm skeptical of this use case being more than a special case of a more general problem.
I'm thinking if we were to address that use case, you would probably need to have a loader that just is in the queue before these things, and it somehow needs to publicize under these conditions, you need to do this stuff. And I believe that would be possible because of exactly what Bradley said, that Nodeland has its own special cache and various things like that. So I think we could do, but as Bradley said, I don't know if we should do, but if it's like, there's a pretty decent amount of stuff that doesn't work without this, then maybe yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's already possible to implement a loader that accepts like the hack proposal in that thread. It's like, yeah, it's already possible to have code running in the loader stack that does this dynamic injection of additional loader functionality. The question is like, we're telling consumers of these command line tools, look, we've written this command line tool to behave in this certain way, and to give you this functionality, unfortunately, you must set the node options environment variable to install this.
That's that is a different problem.
Yeah, that's a different problem.
Yeah, we can solve that problem in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could leverage conditions from the context. So when, let's say you've got your whatever loader is going to handle fetching this stuff, it would check conditions and say, oh, there's some other things that I also need to do for this particular import, and then make them available.
That seems possible. I don't know, since the issue really is about injecting these load hooks, not about specific import sites. I think we'd need to introduce a way to pass conditions per location to when you get to these sites that need the load hook to be done by.
I think with the done one, that would happen because the outputs of the previous kind of get injected into the next. So we could have in context, me?
Context already contains conditions, so you can work in both.
Sorry. Yeah. So what I'm saying is I'm thinking that results can come directly from the previous hook, and then in context, potentially we could have that be mutable by the previous hook. You could have your original context, and then you could have your mutated context. So did everybody freeze?
Nope.
Oh, no. And you could have your mutated context. So that's how you could kind of communicate these conditions from one hook to another. And the change in conditions. So the former hook could say, I know that this is going to be needed. The next guy in line is going to handle this. Can consider these conditions.
We're going to start to get kicked out by the next group, who's probably going to come in any minute. So I would encourage you guys to wrap this up. I will take a look at that PR. I'll ping Guy, Bradley. Let me know if there's anything else that you can think of that needs to happen with that PR. And if you get a chance to look at it, please do so. Anything else we should cover before we get booted?
Just a quick note on that. If we can leverage this, then I think we should probably be okay to potentially address Andrew's potential edge case in a subsequent thing if it's a smaller subset, because we won't be breaking anything.
Leverage what? You said the word this.
Sorry, conditions. Because conditions already exist.
I'm a little confused on the solution, but we can take it offline.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you, everybody. See you all in 2 weeks. Always a pleasure.
Thanks.